My daughter-in-law kept insisting on sending me to a nursing home, and she ended up receiving the eviction notice for my mansion instead. I never thought a Sunday morning cup of coffee would change my life forever. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you feel, even for a second, that this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. It was a crisp October Sunday in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the aroma of toasted sourdough mixed with freshly ground artisanal coffee in my kitchen. I had risen early, as always, to prepare the perfect breakfast: homemade bitter orange marmalade I had made the week before, high-quality European butter, fresh squeezed juice. The white china set with gold rims, the same one I inherited from my mother, shone on the embroidered tablecloth that had taken me months to finish during the long, lonely afternoons. My name is Eleanor Harrington, and at 72, I still woke up every day with the same meticulousness of someone who had built a fortune by precisely managing every dollar that passed through my hands. My late husband, Charles, used to say I had a killer instinct for finance. Perhaps that's why I managed to multiply the assets he left me into an estate that included 3 properties in the metropolitan area, significant stock market shares, and enough savings to live comfortably for the rest of my days. That morning, I was expecting my son, Alexander, and his wife, Victoria. As they had for the past 5 years, they were coming for Sunday lunch. I cooked, they ate, and then they left, leaving me with a strange feeling, as if it were an obligation rather than a pleasure to share those hours with me. Victoria arrived first, as always. Tall, slender, with that perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer handbag that cost more than my housekeeper's monthly salary. Her expensive Chanel fragrance invaded every corner of the house before she even crossed the threshold. "Good morning, Eleanor," she greeted me with that cold smile she had perfected during the 8 years she'd been married to my son. "How are you doing?" "Fine, dear," I replied, though something in her tone made me uneasy. "And Alexander?" "He's on his way. He had to stop by the office for a moment." Alexander worked at a major investment firm, managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for wealthy clients. He earned well, very well, but it never seemed enough for the lifestyle Victoria deemed appropriate for their social standing. There were always subtle comments about bigger houses, more luxurious cars, and more exclusive vacations. We sat in the main living room, where the autumn sunlight filtered through the silk curtains I had personally chosen a decade ago. Victoria surveyed the room with that calculating look I had learned to recognize, as if she were mentally tallying the value of every object, every piece of furniture, every painting hung on the walls. "Eleanor," she began, adjusting herself on the blue velvet sofa, "Alexander and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Yes, well, at your age, living alone in such a large house can be dangerous." The word dangerous hung in the air like a threat. I looked at my daughter-in-law, trying to decipher what lay behind her apparent concern. In her eyes, I saw no genuine love or care. I saw something much colder: calculation. "I don't understand what you mean, Victoria. I feel perfectly fine, thank you." Of course," she continued, using that honeyed voice she employed when she wanted something. "But haven't you thought about your future? About having specialized people close by, nurses, doctors, just in case." At that moment, Alexander arrived. My son, the man I had raised alone after being widowed at 45, walked in wearing his impeccable gray suit and that serious expression he had developed in recent years. He was no longer the boy who ran through these same halls, nor the college student who hugged me gratefully every time I deposited money into his account. He was an elegant stranger who greeted me with a kiss on the cheek as cold as the October breeze off the Atlantic. "Mom," he said, sitting next to Victoria. "My love already mentioned what we've been discussing." My love. Those 2 words pierced me like daggers. When he addressed me, it was always a simple "Mom," never my love, dear, or any term denoting real affection. "Son, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm fine here, in my house." Victoria and Alexander exchanged a glance that did not escape me. It was the look of 2 conspirators who had rehearsed this conversation. "Look, Mom," Alexander continued in that neutral tone he used to discuss investments, "we've been researching senior residences. Very exclusive places with every kind of amenity. Beauty salons, libraries, recreational activities. Retirement residences? I interrupted, feeling the air escape my lungs. Are you talking about nursing homes? They aren't nursing homes, Eleanor, Victoria quickly interjected. They are luxury senior living communities. Places where people your age and of your financial standing can enjoy an active social life without the hassle of maintaining such a massive property. My hands began to tremble. Hassle? What hassle? This house had been my refuge, my sanctuary, the place where I had built my most cherished memories. Every room told a story. The study where Charles worked late reviewing contracts, the kitchen where I had taught Alexander to make my signature crab cakes, the garden I had designed myself that now bloomed splendidly every spring. Besides, Victoria added with a smile that tried to appear compassionate, a house like this requires constant maintenance. And well, it's not that you can't afford it, but why complicate your life when you could be enjoying your golden years without these responsibilities? Your golden years. As if I already had one foot in the grave. I don't want to go to any residence, I said with all the firmness I could muster. This is my home. Alexander was born here. I lived here with your father. I have my entire life here. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria sighed dramatically, as if I were a spoiled child refusing to understand adult logic. Eleanor, she finally said, we don't want you to take this the wrong way. We're only thinking about your well-being. At your age, staying alone is, well, it's a burden on everyone. The word fell on me like a hammer. A burden. That's what they thought of me. The woman who had sacrificed her youth to raise the son who now looked at me without a shred of gratitude in his eyes. The woman who had worked tirelessly to maintain and grow the family inheritance that now, apparently, they considered theirs by right. My heart raced, but I maintained my composure. Years of business experience had taught me not to show weakness when the shark smelled blood in the water. I understand, I said, my voice measured. I understand perfectly, and I truly understood. I understood that the woman who had educated her son in the best private schools, who had paid for his Ivy League university, his master's abroad, his lavish wedding, his honeymoon in the Maldives, was now viewed as an obstacle between them and what they considered their legitimate inheritance. I understood that my years of widowhood, dedicated to wisely managing every investment, every stock, every dollar to ensure a prosperous future for my family, had been interpreted by them as preparation for their future benefit, not for my present well-being. And I understood, with a clarity that chilled my blood, that this conversation was not a suggestion. It was a declaration of war. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my oak rocking chair, the same one where I had nursed Alexander 43 years ago, looking at the photographs decorating the fireplace mantel. There we were, the three of us, Charles, Alexander, and me, on that vacation in Martha's Vineyard when my son was 12. His eyes shone with happiness as he built sandcastles. When had he lost that light? When had he turned into this cold man who saw me as an obstacle? I got up and walked to Charles's study. Everything remained exactly as he had left it. The law books perfectly ordered, his gold fountain pen on the mahogany desk, the photograph of our wedding where I wore a lace dress that had belonged to my grandmother. In that picture, I was 25 and believed that love was eternal. I opened the secret drawer where I kept the most important documents: property deeds, stock certificates, bank statements for my market investments. Everything was in my name, of course. Charles had been very clear before he died. Eleanor, never put anything in anyone else's name, not even Alexander's. Money changes people in ways you cannot imagine. Had my husband intuited what would happen? Had he seen something in our son that I, blinded by maternal love, chose not to recognize? I remembered the first years after Charles's death. Alexander was 29 and had just graduated from business school. I was devastated, lost, unsure how to handle the estate that was suddenly entirely mine. That's when my son grew closer, offering help with the finances, consoling me through the difficult nights. "Mom, let me help you," he would say. "Dad taught me a lot about investments. We can make the money grow more." And I, naive, thought it was filial love. that we would finally have the close relationship I had always longed for. For 2 years, Alexander visited me almost daily. We reviewed bank statements together, analyzed investment opportunities, talked for hours about the future, until he met Victoria. She entered our lives like an elegant storm, blonde, sophisticated, with a blue blood lineage but no real fortune. From day one, I noticed how she surveyed my house, how she subtly inquired about my holdings, how her eyes lit up when Alexander mentioned one of my properties. "Your mother has excellent taste," she would tell Alexander when she thought I couldn't hear. "This house must be worth a fortune on the market right now." After the wedding, everything changed. Alexander's visits became less frequent. When he did come, Victoria always accompanied him, and conversations inevitably drifted toward the same topic. How difficult it must be for me to maintain such a large house. How lonely I must feel. How convenient it would be for me to simplify my life. "Eleanor," Victoria had told me just months after marrying, "don't you think having such a large portfolio is a burden? So many responsibilities, so many decisions to make." I had replied that I liked staying active, that managing my assets gave me purpose. But I saw something in her gaze that troubled me. It wasn't concern. It was impatience. Sundays became strange rituals. They arrived, ate what I had prepared with such care, and then the conversation always led back to my situation. My age, my solitude, the risks of living alone, the advantages of senior communities. "Imagine, Mom," Alexander would say, "not having to worry about maintenance, about security, about anything. Just enjoy." But I knew it wasn't about my enjoyment. It was about my inheritance. 3 months ago, late one night, I overheard one of Alexander's phone calls. He had come for dinner and was in the garden talking on the phone while I prepared dessert. "She can't last forever," he was telling someone. "It's a $15 million house in the best neighborhood of Greenwich. She's sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even realize it." "And the other properties?" asked a voice I recognized as Victoria's. "The Manhattan townhouse, the Palm Beach condo. Altogether, it must be close to $25 million, not counting the stocks and investment funds." "We have to accelerate the process," Victoria insisted. "We can't wait for her to, you know." "I know, but she's more stubborn than I thought." I froze in the kitchen, the caramel custard trembling in my hands. "Accelerate what process? Wait for what? For me to die?" That night, after they left, I reviewed all my documents. Everything was in order, everything in my name, but something unsettled me. I called my attorney, Mr. Michael Sullivan, a trusted man who had worked with Charles for decades. "Eleanor," he said when I told him my concerns, "you have to be very careful. I've seen cases of families pressuring elders to prematurely transfer assets. It's more common than you think. But what can they do? Everything is legally protected. They can do many things. They can argue mental incompetence. They can manipulate you emotionally. They might even try to get you to sign documents without realizing the real content." His words chilled my blood. Was that what was happening? Were family Sundays nothing more than psychological softening sessions? I started paying closer attention to their visits. I noticed how Victoria always brought accidental folders, papers she pulled from her purse while we talked about other things. I noticed how Alexander always redirected the conversation toward my future well-being when I tried to discuss other topics. "Mom, have you thought about making your will more specific?" he asked one Sunday. "Something that clarifies your intentions to avoid legal problems later." "I already have a will, son." "Yes, but that one is very general. You could be more specific about who should manage what, who should make decisions if you can't." There it was, the key word. If you can't. What do you mean by can't? Well, if you get sick, if you need special care, someone needs to be able to access your accounts to pay your medical bills. Victoria nodded vigorously. "It's very important to have these things organized, Eleanor, for your own peace of mind." That night, I called Michael again. "Mike, I need you to review something. I want to ensure no one can declare me incompetent without real basis. Has anything specific happened? Let's just say I'm starting to understand certain family pressures. Eleanor, I want you to come to my office tomorrow. And I want you to record any conversation where they pressure you to sign something or transfer properties. Record my own son, Eleanor. In 40 years of practice, I've seen families destroyed by money. Don't trust anyone when this much wealth is at stake. Not even your son. Those words haunted me for days. How had I reached this point? How had I raised a son capable of conspiring against his own mother? But the answer was there. In all those years where I had confused providing with loving, where I had bought his affection with money, where I had thought that by giving him everything he wanted, he would give me the unconditional love I needed in return. I had raised a man who saw his mother not as a person deserving of respect and care, but as a temporary obstacle between him and a multi-million-dollar inheritance. And now, sitting in the darkness of my study, surrounded by photographs of a family that no longer existed, I understood that the war they had declared that afternoon wasn't just about my money. It was about my dignity, my freedom, and my right to live my final years as I chose. But they didn't know the real Eleanor Harrington. They had underestimated the woman who had turned a modest inheritance into a considerable fortune, the woman who had navigated the business world for decades without being intimidated by anyone. If they wanted a fight, they would have it, but it wouldn't be the war they expected. The next day, Tuesday morning, the first sign that the situation had escalated beyond simple family conversations arrived. I was having my morning coffee on the terrace, enjoying the autumn sun filtering through the branches of the century-old oak Charles had planted the year Alexander was born, when the doorbell rang. It was a young man, dressed in a cheap suit and a poorly tied tie, carrying a faux leather folder under his arm. He introduced himself as Daniel Jones, a social worker from County Adult Protective Services, APS. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," he said with a smile that tried to appear friendly but didn't reach his eyes. "We've received a call of concern regarding your well-being." "A call of concern?" I repeated, feeling my blood run cold. "Yes. A close family member expressed apprehension about your ability to live independently. It's protocol that we investigate these situations." A close family member. I didn't need to be a detective to know who had made that call. "And what kind of investigation does that entail?" I asked, maintaining my composure even though I felt a volcano was about to erupt inside. "Well, a basic assessment of your living conditions, your mental status, your ability to care for yourself." He paused, consulting his notes. "We also need to verify if you have adequate family support or if you require social assistance services." Social assistance services. As if I were a neglected indigent, not a woman with more assets than most executives in Manhattan. "Please come in," I said, knowing that refusing would only fuel the narrative someone was constructing about my supposed incompetence. For the next hour, Daniel Jones subjected me to an interrogation disguised as a friendly evaluation. Could I cook for myself? Did I remember to take my medications? Did I have episodes of confusion? Did I feel safe living alone in such a large house? I answered every question with the patience of someone who had spent decades negotiating complex contracts. Yes, I cooked every day. No, I took no medications beyond some vitamins. No, I had no episodes of confusion. And yes, I felt perfectly safe in my own home. "And your family?" he finally asked. "Do you maintain regular contact with them?" "My son and daughter-in-law come for lunch every Sunday," I replied, feeling the bitter irony of the situation. "And are they concerned about you?" "Apparently so," I said, unable to fully conceal the sarcasm in my voice. Daniel Jones took notes throughout the conversation, and when he finally left, he assured me the report would be completely objective, but I knew the damage was done. Now there was an official file with my name on it, a document that could be used to support future claims about my inability to live independently. That afternoon, I called Mike Sullivan and told him what happened. "Eleanor, this is more serious than I thought," he said gravely. "They are building a legal case. If they can prove you can't care for yourself, they can petition for a judicial guardianship." Guardianship. A judge could appoint your son as your legal guardian, giving him total control over your finances and life decisions. They could even commit you against your will. The words hit me like hammer blows. Commit me against my will? Turn my own son into my legal jailer? What can I do? First, we need a complete medical evaluation that proves your mental competency. Second, we must document everything, every conversation, every pressure, every attempt at manipulation. And third, he paused meaningfully. You must consider protecting your assets before it's too late. Protect them how? There are several legal options. We could establish an irrevocable trust, transfer some properties to corporate entities, diversify your investments so they cannot be easily accessed by a guardian. I couldn't eat that night. My stomach had completely closed up. I sat in the living room, looking at the walls that held all my history, wondering how I had gotten to this point where I had to legally defend myself against my own son. On Wednesday, Victoria showed up unannounced. This was unusual. She always called first, always came with Alexander. But this time she arrived alone at 3 in the afternoon, when she knew I would be having my usual tea. "Eleanor?" she said with a smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "Can we talk?" I showed her into the living room, where she sat on the edge of the sofa as if prepared to flee at any moment. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation on Sunday," she began, pulling an envelope from her purse. "And I think I have a solution that could benefit everyone." I immediately recognized the tactic. It was the same one I had used in business negotiations. Present the problem, then offer the solution you had planned all along. "What kind of solution?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "Well," she said, extending the envelope toward me, "Alexander and I have been researching luxury residences. We found a marvelous one in Bedford Hills, very exclusive, only for people of a certain economic level." I opened the envelope. Inside was a glossy brochure for a place called the Golden Acres Retirement Estate, premium living for distinguished seniors. The photographs showed elegant rooms, perfectly manicured gardens, smiling seniors playing bridge or participating in painting classes. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Victoria continued. "Look, they have a spa, a library, even a small bistro. It's like living in a 5-star hotel, but with all the medical assistance you could need." "And the cost?" I asked, though the question was rhetorical. I knew she wasn't asking if I could afford it. She was telling me how much of my fortune it would consume monthly. "Well, it's not cheap," Victoria admitted with false modesty. "It's $18,000 a month, but for someone with your assets, it's perfectly manageable. $18,000 a month, $216,000 a year. In 10 years, over $2 million. But that wasn't what truly bothered me. What outraged me was the blatant manipulation, the way I was being pushed into this decision as if it were inevitable. And who would manage my finances while I'm at this 5-star hotel? Well, naturally, Alexander would take care of those bothersome details. That way you wouldn't have to worry about investments, payments, anything complicated. There it was, the real objective of this entire charade. Total control of my wealth disguised as filial care. "Victoria," I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "I appreciate your concern, but I have no intention of moving to any residence." Her smile faded slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Eleanor, I understand that change can be scary, but think of the benefits. No more worries about maintaining this huge house, no more loneliness, no more financial responsibilities. No more freedom," I added, and this time I didn't bother to hide the coldness in my voice. "That's not it," Victoria protested, but something in her eyes told me it was exactly that. "It's about your safety, your well-being." "My well-being," I repeated slowly. "And does my well-being include you moving into my house while I'm locked up in a residence?" The question took her by surprise. For a moment, the mask of filial concern slipped, and I saw something much more honest in her expression, irritation at my resistance. "Well," she finally said, "someone would have to look after the property. It can't just sit empty." "Of course not," I murmured, finally understanding the devilish perfection of their plan. They would send me to an expensive residence that would systematically drain my assets, while they lived in my house, probably renting out my other properties and managing my investments according to their own interests. In a few years, when my money ran out paying for the residence, they would conveniently discover they could no longer afford to keep me there, and by then, they would have transferred all my main assets into their names. It was brilliant in its cruelty. "Victoria," I said, rising from the sofa, "I think this conversation is over. But Eleanor—" "The conversation is over," I repeated, heading toward the door. She stood up slowly, gathering her purse with tense movements. "I hope you reconsider," she said on her way out. "For your own good." After closing the door behind her, I stood in the foyer for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. My daughter-in-law had just subtly threatened me in my own home. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel truly alone in the world. The following days were a nightmare of microaggressions that made me doubt my own sanity. Alexander started calling me 3 times a day, always under the guise of checking in to make sure I was fine. His questions, seemingly innocent, were designed to make me appear confused or incapable. "Mom, did you remember to take your vitamins this morning? Mom, are you sure you locked the door properly when you went out? Mom, Maria tells me you didn't eat dinner last night. Did you forget?" Maria, my housekeeper of 20 years, had become a spy in my own home. I caught her speaking in hushed tones on the phone in the kitchen, and when I asked who she was talking to, she lied, saying it was her sister, but I clearly heard the name Mr. Alexander before she hung up. "Maria," I said to her that afternoon while she prepared dinner, "is there something you want to tell me?" She avoided my gaze, concentrating excessively on peeling potatoes. "I don't know what you mean, Eleanor." "I mean your conversations with my son." Her hands stopped. Finally, she looked up, eyes filled with guilt. "Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Alexander only asked me to keep him informed. He says he's worried about you. And what exactly do you tell him?" "Nothing bad, I swear. Just, if you eat well, if you sleep well, if you leave the house, if I receive visitors, I suppose." Maria nodded, ashamed. "Eleanor, I didn't want to, but he told me it was for your own good. That if something happened to you—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Alexander had turned Maria into his informant using the same tactic he used with me, feigning concern for my well-being. That night, after having dinner alone again, I sat at my desk and began to write. I documented every call, every strange question, every seemingly innocent comment. Mike Sullivan was right. I needed evidence of what was happening. Friday brought another unexpected visit. This time, it was Dr. Paul Miller, the family physician who had attended my family for 15 years. He came just for a routine checkup, he told me. "Eleanor," he said, after taking my blood pressure and checking my reflexes, "Alexander mentioned that you've been a little scatterbrained lately." "Scatterbrained?" I asked, feeling the rage begin to simmer in my stomach. "Well, small memory lapses, moments of confusion. It's normal at your age," but he's concerned. "Paul, what small memory lapses? What moments of confusion?" "Because I don't recall having any." The doctor seemed uncomfortable, as if he had expected me to confirm the symptoms Alexander had described. "Perhaps. Have you had trouble remembering where you put things? Difficulties concentrating on complex tasks?" "No," I replied sharply. "I haven't had any problems of that kind." "And your appetite? Your sleep?" "I sleep perfectly and eat normally." "Paul, what exactly did my son tell you?" The doctor sighed, clearly caught between his loyalty to me and what Alexander had told him. "He said you'd been rejecting help, that you refused to consider assisted living options, that you seemed paranoid about the family's intentions." Paranoid. That word hit me like a bullet. It was perfect, because it turned my legitimate resistance into a symptom of mental illness. "And what do you think, Paul? After 15 years treating me, do you think I'm paranoid?" The doctor looked me in the eye for a long moment. "Eleanor, you are one of the most lucid and capable women I know, but I also know that family dynamics can be complicated." It was his diplomatic way of telling me he suspected Alexander's motives without professionally committing himself. "Will you file a report on this visit?" I asked. "Only if I find anything medically relevant," he assured me, and I haven't found anything. After he left, I immediately called Mike Sullivan. "They're accelerating the process," I told him. "They've involved my family doctor. Eleanor, you need to act now. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I have some documents prepared." Saturday morning, Mike Sullivan waited for me with a thick folder full of legal papers. "I've prepared several options," he explained. "First, a very specific, durable power of attorney that will allow you to designate someone you trust to act on your behalf only in very particular circumstances. Second, the creation of an irrevocable trust that will protect your main assets. And third, an advance healthcare directive that specifies exactly what kind of care you do and do not want to receive. And will this prevent Alexander from gaining control of my finances? If we do it correctly, yes. But, Eleanor, there's something else you must consider." "What?" "Your son can still try to obtain a judicial guardianship. If a judge determines you can't care for yourself, these documents could be overturned." The reality hit me like an avalanche. No matter how many legal precautions we took, as long as Alexander could convince a judge that I was incompetent, I was still in danger. What can I do? "We need to be proactive. I want you to get a complete neuropsychological evaluation with a specialist I trust. We also need testimonies from people who can attest to your mental competency and your ability to live independently." I spent the rest of Saturday signing documents, reorganizing my estate, and feeling as if I were preparing for a war I never wanted to fight. That night, as I reviewed the papers I had just signed, the phone rang. It was Alexander, and his voice sounded different, colder, more controlled. "Mom, Victoria told me about your conversation on Wednesday. And? I think you're behaving irrationally. Refusing help when you clearly need it isn't normal. Alexander, I don't need help. What I need is for you to respect my decisions. Mom, Maria tells me you've barely eaten this week. Dr. Miller is concerned about your mental state. The county social worker already has a file on your case." There it was. The confirmation that everything had been orchestrated. Maria reporting my eating habits, the doctor questioning my mental health, the social worker building a case against me. "You know what, son?" I told him, feeling something definitively break inside me. "I think it's time we have a very honest conversation." "About what?" "About how much my estate is worth and how long you think I'll live." The silence that followed was deafening. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I know exactly what you are doing. I know this has nothing to do with my well-being and everything to do with my inheritance. That is exactly the kind of paranoia the doctor was talking about." "Paranoia, Alexander? Is it paranoia when your own daughter-in-law comes to my house with brochures for $18,000 a month residences? Is it paranoia when a social worker shows up after an anonymous call expressing concern? Is it paranoia when my housekeeper becomes your spy? Mom, you're agitated. This confirms you need professional help." And there was the masterstroke. Any resistance on my part would be interpreted as additional evidence of my mental incompetence. It was a perfect trap. If I cooperated, I lost my independence. If I resisted, I confirmed their narrative about my instability. "Alexander," I said with the calmest voice I could muster, "I want you to know something. I have completely reorganized my legal affairs. If you think you're going to manipulate me into handing over my assets, you are wrong. Mom, I'm not finished. And I want you to understand this very clearly. If you continue with this campaign to have me declared incompetent, you are going to discover that this old woman you think you can manipulate has resources you can't even imagine." I hung up before he could respond. For the first time in weeks, I felt powerful. But I also knew I had just openly declared war, and they wouldn't hesitate to respond with everything they had. The response was swift. Monday morning, while I was calmly having breakfast on my terrace reading the Wall Street Journal, a routine I had maintained for 30 years to monitor my investments, 2 official cars arrived. Out of the first stepped the same social worker, Daniel Jones, but this time accompanied by an older woman with a severe expression. From the second vehicle descended 2 municipal police officers. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. I knew this moment would come, but the reality of seeing official uniforms at the entrance of my house hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Mrs. Harrington," Daniel Jones said when I opened the door, "this is Dr. Carol Hayes, a clinical psychologist from the Department of Social Services. We are here to conduct a mandatory wellness evaluation." "Mandatory?" I asked, though my voice sounded calmer than I felt inside. We have received multiple reports of concern regarding your ability to live independently, Dr. Hayes explained in a monotonous voice, as if reading from a script. The law requires us to investigate when there are indications of self-neglect or cognitive decline. The police officers remained near the cars, but their presence was a silent threat. This was not optional. May I see the court order authorizing this evaluation? I asked. Daniel Jones exchanged a glance with Dr. Hayes. Mrs. Harrington, we do not need a court order for a wellness evaluation. It is standard administrative procedure. A lie. Mike Sullivan had explained exactly when they could and could not enter my property without my consent, but I also knew that resisting at this moment would only add more evidence to their file about my supposed paranoia and lack of cooperation. Come in, please, I said, stepping aside to let them pass. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Hayes subjected me to a series of questions that seemed designed to confuse me. What day of the week was it? Who was the president? Could I remember 3 words she would tell me and repeat them after 5 minutes? Could I subtract 7 from 100 and keep going? I answered every question correctly, but I noticed how she took especially detailed notes when I paused to think, or when I asked her to repeat a question. Do you live alone in this house? She asked. Yes. Doesn't it seem too large for a person your age? No. How do you handle household chores? I have a housekeeper who comes every day. And the finances? Do you manage your own bank accounts? There was the key question, the real reason for this entire farce. Yes, I manage my own finances. Don't you find it overwhelming? I understand you have a considerable estate. I don't find it overwhelming at all. I have managed my own finances for over 30 years. And your family? Hasn't your son offered to help you with these complicated matters? My son has offered me many things, I replied carefully, but I prefer to maintain my independence. The doctor scribbled something in her notebook that seemed much longer than my response. After the questions finished, Daniel Jones walked through my house taking photographs. To document the living conditions, he explained when I protested. He photographed the kitchen, where my breakfast sat half-eaten, the living room, where some magazines were scattered on the coffee table, my bedroom, where the bed wasn't made because I had been interrupted by their arrival, the study, where my financial documents were organized in tidy piles on the desk. Every image, I knew, would be interpreted in the way that best suited their narrative. The magazines would become evidence of disorganization, the unmade bed, personal neglect. The financial documents, an overwhelming burden for an elderly mind. Do you take any medication? Dr. Hayes asked. Only vitamins and calcium. Nothing for anxiety, depression, sleep issues? No. Have you considered that you might benefit from some type of medication to help you relax? Sometimes, at your age, a little pharmacological help can make life easier. The suggestion chilled my blood. Were they hinting that I should be medicated? That my resistance to their plans was a medical problem that could be resolved with drugs? I don't need medication, I said firmly. Of course. It was just a suggestion. When they finally left, I stood in my foyer, trembling with rage and impotence. I knew I had just been subjected to an examination designed to fail, an evaluation where every normal answer would be twisted to seem abnormal. I immediately called Mike Sullivan. Eleanor, are you okay? They just left. A social services psychologist and a social worker. They said it was a mandatory evaluation. Did they have a court order? They said they didn't need one. They lied, but the damage is done. What kind of questions did they ask you? I told him everything. The questions about my mental competency, the insinuations about medication, the photographs of my house. Eleanor, this is very serious. They will use this evaluation to support a guardianship petition. You need to act immediately. What can I do? First, I want you to go to the neuropsychologist I recommended tomorrow. We need an independent evaluation proving your mental competency. Second, we will file a formal complaint about this irregular evaluation. And third, he paused, making me nervous. Third what? Eleanor, I think it's time for you to consider immediately moving your most important assets out of the reach of any potential guardian. That afternoon, following Mike Sullivan's instructions, I went to the major New York bank where I held most of my investments. I requested an urgent meeting with the director, Mr. Stephen Clark, a man I had worked with for 15 years. Eleanor, he said when I explained the situation, I understand your concern. We've seen similar cases. What can we do to help you? I need to protect my assets so they cannot be accessed by a judicial guardian, but so that I maintain total control as long as I am competent. We have several options. We could establish a Swiss fiduciary account, create a limited liability company, LLC, with you as the sole shareholder, or transfer funds to accounts that require biometric authentication in addition to your signature. For the next 3 hours, Stephen and his legal team helped me completely restructure my estate. We created 3 different entities: an LLC that owned my real estate properties, an international trust that held my main stocks and investments, and a reduced personal account that would contain only the money needed for my daily expenses. This way, Stephen explained, even if someone obtains guardianship over you, they would only have access to the personal account. Your main assets would be protected by legal structures that would require your conscious and verified consent to be modified. It was brilliant, but I also realized how extraordinary the situation was. A 72-year-old woman, completely competent, being forced to hide her own fortune from her own son. When I got home that night, I found Maria waiting for me in the kitchen with an anxious expression. Mrs. Harrington, your relatives came. Alexander and Victoria? Yes. They wanted to enter with keys. They said they had the right because you aren't. Well, and what did you tell them? I told them you were out but perfectly fine. But Eleanor, Maria hesitated. Mr. Alexander told me that soon he would be in charge of everything. That soon he might fire me if I didn't cooperate better. There it was, the direct threat. Alexander was already acting as if the guardianship were a fait accompli. Maria, I said, taking her hands, I want you to know something. I control my own finances and my own decisions. No one else has authority over this house or over your employment. Do you understand? She nodded, but I saw fear in her eyes. Fear of being caught between her loyalty to me and Alexander's threats. That night, as I prepared for bed, I realized something that terrified me more than all the legal threats. I no longer felt safe in my own home, my house, the place where I had raised my son, where I had mourned the death of my husband, where I had built a prosperous and meaningful life, had become hostile territory, and tomorrow, I would have to prove to a stranger that my mind was perfectly sound in order to defend my right to continue living in it. The irony was devastating. To protect my freedom, I would have to prove that I deserved to have it. But I was ready for that battle. After all, I had survived worse things than an ungrateful son and an ambitious daughter-in-law, although I never thought I would have to add those words to the list of things I had survived. Tuesday morning, I went to the Center for Advanced Neuropsychology in Manhattan, located in the elegant Upper East Side. Dr. Edward Vance, the specialist recommended by Mike Sullivan, was a man in his 50s with a reputation for being absolutely incorruptible in his evaluations. If anyone could provide an objective diagnosis of my mental state, it was him. The evaluation lasted 4 hours and was exhaustive to a level I had never experienced. Short and long-term memory tests, executive function evaluations, spatial orientation tests, analysis of abstract reasoning ability. Dr. Vance had me solve complex math problems, recall number sequences, identify patterns, and perform tasks that required sustained concentration. Mrs. Harrington, he said at the end, reviewing the results, your scores are not only within the normal range for your age, but significantly above average. Your working memory is exceptional, your planning and organizational capacity are superior, and there is no indication of cognitive decline. And will that be officially documented? Of course. I will prepare a comprehensive report that you can use legally. But Mrs. Harrington, I must ask, why do you need this evaluation? I briefly told him the situation. His eyebrows furrowed with every detail. What you describe is a pattern we see too often, he finally said. Family members who use the legal system to gain control over significant estates. It is a form of financial abuse against older adults. And it is devastatingly effective because it is disguised as family concern. Have you seen similar cases? Too many. And the saddest thing is that the system, which should protect the elderly, often becomes the weapon used against them. When I returned home, another unpleasant surprise awaited me. Alexander was sitting in my living room, drinking coffee he had evidently served himself, reading one of my bank statements he had taken from my desk. "Hello, Mom," he said without looking up from the paper. "I hope you don't mind that I let myself in. I still have the emergency keys you gave me years ago." The violation of my privacy was so blatant that for a moment I was speechless. He was reviewing my private financial documents as if it were his right. "Alexander, get out of my house immediately." "Mom, we need to talk." He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes shook me. There was no love, not even feigned concern, only a calculating coldness that painfully reminded me of his father when he negotiated particularly tough contracts. "We have nothing to talk about. On the contrary, we have a lot to discuss." He stood up, still holding my bank statement. "For example, you can explain to me why you have been moving money so erratically lately." My blood ran cold. How did he know about the transfers I had made yesterday? "My finances are none of your business. They will be very soon." His smile was cruel. "Mom, the petition for judicial guardianship is being officially filed tomorrow. The social services report is already complete, and it is not favorable to you." "What report?" "That evaluation was irregular. It was completely legal, and it documents clear signs of cognitive decline, paranoia, and inability to make rational financial decisions." He shook my bank statement. "The unexplained bank transfers you've made recently only confirm their assessment. It was a perfect trap. My attempts to protect my assets were being used as evidence of my mental incompetence." "Alexander," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you are my son. I raised you, educated you, loved you unconditionally. How can you do this to me?" For a moment, something akin to emotion crossed his face, but it vanished so quickly that I thought I had imagined it. "Mom, this isn't personal. It's practical. You won't live forever, and when you die, all of this," he gestured toward the house, "will be mine anyway. Why wait until then when we can make the transition now, while we can still ensure you receive the best possible care?" "The best care? Do you mean locking me up in a residence while you live in my house?" "I mean putting you in a place where professionals can ensure you are safe and comfortable while I manage the financial complexities you clearly can no longer handle." "Can't handle? Do you know how much my estate has grown in the last 5 years? Do you know that my stock market investments have consistently outperformed the benchmark index? Do you know that I have intelligently diversified between real estate, securities, and liquid capital?" "Mom, that financial jargon you've memorized doesn't prove competency. It proves obsession. It proves you're clinging to responsibilities that should be handled by someone younger, more capable." He was brilliant in his malice. He converted my competence into obsession, my independence into stubbornness, my financial success into a burden that needed to be relieved. "And Victoria?" I asked. "Where is your wife in this very considerate plan?" "Victoria is being very generous. She has agreed to move in here to keep the house in good condition while you receive professional care." "How generous of her," I murmured. "It is. Especially considering this house will require significant maintenance. The landscaping, the pool, the heating and cooling systems, it's all very expensive. Victoria is willing to oversee all of that without charging you a cent. Without charging me. As if she were my employee instead of the woman planning to steal my home. "Alexander, I want you to leave. Now." "Mom, I know this is hard to accept, but think about it. No more worries about utility payments. No more stress about investments. No more loneliness in this huge house. At Golden Acres, you'll have constant company, organized activities, 24-hour medical attention, and you will have my house, my rental properties, my stocks, and my money. We will have the responsibility of managing your estate so that you can receive the best possible care for the rest of your life. And when my money runs out paying $18,000 a month for the residence, Mom, you have enough liquid capital to live comfortably at Golden Acres for the time you have reasonably left." There it was. The final confirmation. They had calculated how long I would probably live and how much it would cost to keep me in the residence during that period. It was a simple math problem for them. 72-year-old woman, average life expectancy, monthly cost of care, available estate. Everything boiled down to an equation where I was simply a variable. "You know what, Alexander?" I said, walking toward the front door. "You're right about one thing. This isn't personal, it's business. And strictly speaking, you are no longer my son. Mom, get out. Leave my house and don't come back unless it's with a court order that gives you the right to be here. You are making this much harder than it has to be." Good, because it turns out I'm much tougher than you thought. After he left, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time in weeks. I didn't cry over the betrayal, although it hurt. I didn't cry out of fear, although it was real. I cried for the definitive loss of the illusion that I had a family. Alexander was no longer my son in any sense that mattered. He was a calculating stranger who saw my death as a business opportunity and my life as an inconvenient obstacle. But as I wiped away my tears, I also felt something else. Determination. If they wanted a war, they would have it. But they would discover that they severely underestimated their opponent. Eleanor Harrington hadn't built a multi-million-dollar fortune by being docile. She had survived Wall Street culture by being shrewder, tougher, and more ruthless than the men who tried to intimidate her. And if she had learned anything in 40 years managing investments and wealth, it was this: patience and strategy always overcome greed and arrogance. Tomorrow, they would file their guardianship petition, but I, too, would have some surprises prepared for them. Surprises that would teach them that robbing Eleanor Harrington was not as simple as they had imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in Charles's study with all my legal documents spread across the mahogany desk, planning my counterattack with the same meticulousness I had used to multiply my fortune over the past 3 decades. If Alexander thought he could strategically outmaneuver the woman who had turned a $200,000 inheritance into a $25 million estate, he was gravely mistaken. At 6 a.m, I called Mike Sullivan. "Eleanor, are you okay? It's awfully early. Mike, I need you to file a criminal complaint against my son for trespassing and unauthorized access to private financial documents." "What happened?" I told him about Alexander's visit, how he had entered with emergency keys I had given years ago, and how he had been reviewing my bank statements. "Eleanor, technically, if you gave him those keys..." "Mike, those keys were for medical emergencies, not for him to go through my private financial records. And I have something else." "What?" "I've been recording all our conversations since last week. I have evidence of his admission that this is about money, not my well-being." The silence on the other end of the line was eloquent. "Eleanor, you recorded your own son?" "I recorded a man who is trying to steal my estate using the legal system, and I have 3 hours of evidence of their true motivations. Send me those recordings immediately." "And Eleanor..." "Yes? I think it's time we go on the offensive." By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in the elegant law offices of Sullivan and Associates, but this time I didn't come alone. Mike had assembled a complete team, a specialist in family law, an expert in asset protection, and a private investigator who specialized in cases of elder financial abuse. Mrs. Harrington, the detective, a burly man named Robert "Rob" Sanders, told me, "We've done a preliminary investigation into your daughter-in-law. The results are interesting." He opened a thick folder full of photographs and documents. "Victoria Prescott comes from a respected family but without real resources. Her parents lost most of their wealth in failed investments 10 years ago. She worked as an executive assistant when she met your son, but she quit immediately after getting married. And? In the last 3 years, she has accumulated significant debt. Credit cards, personal loans, overdue payments on beauty treatments and luxury purchases. She owes approximately $100,000. The information hit me like a revelation. Victoria wasn't just ambitious. She was financially desperate. There's more," Rob continued. "We've documented at least 6 trips to high-stakes casinos in Atlantic City in the last 2 months. Records show consistent losses. Does Victoria have a gambling problem? It appears so. And the debts are exclusively in her name, not shared with your son." Mike leaned forward. "Eleanor, this completely changes the dynamic. They are not just coveting your inheritance. They are trying to use your estate to solve Victoria's financial crises." The family law specialist, a sharp woman named Carla Evans, added, "With this information, we can argue that the guardianship petition is not for your well-being, but to access your assets and resolve gambling debts. That is fraudulent petitioning. What do you propose we do?" "Full counterattack," Mike said. "We file a lawsuit for conspiracy to commit fraud. We request a restraining order prohibiting them from approaching you or your property, and most importantly," he paused dramatically, "we hold a press conference." "A press conference?" "Eleanor, your case is not unique. There are thousands of older Americans being victimized by relatives who abuse the guardianship system. The media, from the New York Post to national morning shows, will be very interested in a story about a 72-year-old woman fighting her own son to maintain her independence." The idea both terrified and thrilled me. Making my family pain public seemed a betrayal of decades of carefully guarded privacy, but it was also an opportunity to expose the systemic cruelty that allowed stories like mine to happen. "What if I lose?" "Eleanor," Carla told me, "with the evidence we have, you won't lose. But even if you did, at least you will have fought. At least you will have shown that Eleanor Harrington did not allow herself to be silently manipulated." That afternoon, while the legal team prepared the documentation, I received an unexpected call. It was Alexander, and his voice sounded different. Worried. "Mom, we urgently need to talk." "We already had our conversation, Alexander." "Mom, please. There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. As if 30 years of financial manipulation were a simple communication error. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Victoria tells me that you've been investigating her. That you've hired detectives." Interesting. Apparently Rob Sanders hadn't been as discreet as I thought. Or perhaps he had been deliberately indiscreet to pressure my opponents. "And what if I have?" "Mom, that's paranoia. Why would you investigate your own family?" "Because my own family is trying to steal my estate, Alexander. Does that sound like a sufficient reason?" "No one is trying to steal anything from you. We just want to ensure you are cared for." "Alexander, I know about Victoria's debts. I know about the casino. I know about the $100,000 she owes." The silence that followed was deafening. How do you know that?" "Because contrary to what you two believe, my mind works perfectly, and when someone tries to manipulate me, I investigate." "Mom, I can explain." "There is nothing to explain. You need my money to resolve your wife's gambling debts, so you decided to declare me incompetent to legally access my accounts." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Then explain why Victoria has visited high-stakes casinos 12 times in 2 months. Explain why she owes money to 3 different loan sharks. Explain why you suddenly became so urgent about my well-being just as her debts reached a critical point." "Mom, no, not anymore. Alexander, tomorrow I will file criminal and civil lawsuits against both of you. For fraud, for conspiracy, for elder financial abuse, and I will make all of this very public." "Public? Mom, think about the family. Our reputation." "Our reputation? Are you worried about our reputation after trying to lock me up in a nursing home to steal my money?" "Mom, if you make this public, all of Greenwich will know that your own son..." "All of Greenwich will know that my own son tried to declare me incompetent to pay off his wife's gambling debts." "Yes, let them know." I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Power. For the first time since this nightmare began, I controlled the narrative. I had the information. I had the strategy. I had the most competent legal team in Manhattan. And for the first time in months, Alexander sounded scared. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because my problems had disappeared, but because I had finally stopped being a victim of them. Tomorrow, the most public and aggressive phase of my defense would begin. Tomorrow, the world would know that Eleanor Harrington would not be manipulated by anyone, not even the son she had raised. Tomorrow, my true liberation would begin. And as I drifted off to sleep in my own bed, in my own house, protected by legal orders and surrounded by a team fighting for me instead of against me, I felt something I had forgotten during these terrible months. I felt hope. Not the hope of regaining the love of a son who had probably never truly existed, but the hope of regaining my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to live the rest of my years on my own terms. It was a different, more mature, more realistic hope, but it was mine, and no one could take it away. 6 months later, as I was having my morning coffee on the terrace of my Greenwich home, my house which remained completely mine, I reflected on how a simple Sunday conversation had changed not only my life, but my entire understanding of what it meant to be free. The press conference had been a resounding success. The media, from the New York Post to national morning shows, had seized on the story like hungry vultures. 72-year-old heiress fights own son to avoid commitment. The dark side of guardianship, when family becomes the enemy. Eleanor Harrington, the woman who said no to family blackmail. For weeks, my case had dominated local news and had inspired dozens of other families to report similar situations. But the true victory hadn't come through media exposure, but through what happened in the courtroom 3 weeks after we filed our lawsuits. Alexander and Victoria had arrived with a second-rate public defender, clearly the only lawyer they could afford after their resources were depleted paying off Victoria's most urgent debts. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the recordings, the financial reports, the neuropsychological evaluation, the casino records, his decision was emphatic. Not only do I categorically reject the petition for guardianship, the magistrate declared, but I order a full investigation into the fraudulent use of the judicial system for purposes of financial abuse. Victoria had begun to cry in the courtroom, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration at being discovered. Alexander had remained silent, staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. The restraining order had been immediately granted. They could not come within 500 yards of my house, they could not contact me directly, and they could make no future claims on my estate without judicial supervision. But the true justice came 2 months later, when Victoria was arrested for financial fraud. Apparently, in addition to the gambling debts we knew about, she had been falsifying documents to obtain loans using information stolen from other members of wealthy families. My case had triggered a broader investigation that revealed an entire network of scams targeting older adults with considerable estates. Alexander, to avoid prosecution as an accomplice, had accepted a plea deal that included mandatory therapy and community service at a center for victims of financial abuse. The irony was delicious. My son, who had tried to declare me incompetent, now had to help other victims of the exact type of abuse he had tried to perpetrate against me. But beyond the legal victories, what had truly changed was myself. For the first months after the judgment, I had expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for the loss of the son I thought I had. It had taken weeks of therapy, the irony of ironies, therapy I had freely chosen, to understand that the grief I was experiencing was real and necessary. I had to mourn the death of a relationship that, I realized, had been largely a fantasy of my own making. Now, sitting on my renovated terrace, I had hired the best landscapers in Greenwich to transform the space into a personal oasis. I could admit an uncomfortable truth. I had confused providing with loving throughout Alexander's life. I had used my money as a substitute for genuine emotional connection, and I had raised a man who viewed relationships in transactional terms. But that guilt no longer consumed me. I had done the best I could with the information and emotional tools I had at the time. And now, at 73, I had finally learned the difference between loving someone and allowing them to manipulate you in the name of love. My life had acquired a richness that had nothing to do with my financial assets. I had started taking painting classes at the local art center, something I had wanted to do for decades but had always postponed for more important responsibilities. I had traveled to Rome, Paris, and London, alone, for the first time in my life, and had discovered the intoxicating freedom of waking up in a foreign city without having to consult anyone about my plans for the day. I had established a charitable foundation to help other older adults facing family financial abuse. The Eleanor Harrington Foundation for Senior Autonomy had already helped more than 50 people protect their estates and maintain their independence. It was my way of transforming my pain into purpose. I had also renewed my relationship with Maria, who now worked as the foundation's administrator in addition to caring for my house. We had talked honestly about her dilemma during the months of manipulation, and I perfectly understood why she had felt pressured to report to Alexander. Forgiveness had been easy once we established clear new boundaries and mutual expectations. The house felt different now. The rooms that once felt empty and silent now felt spacious and peaceful. I had filled the walls with my own paintings, clumsy but enthusiastic experiments with watercolors, and had converted Charles's study into an office for the foundation. The most surprising thing had been to discover, at 73, that I had an aptitude for social business. Managing the foundation required the same skills I had used to handle my investments: careful analysis, strategic planning, risk management. But now these skills had a purpose that went beyond capital accumulation. I was using my financial expertise to protect other people, to create real social value. My personal investments had continued to grow. Without the constant stress of family manipulation, I had been able to concentrate again on managing my portfolio, intelligently diversifying between emerging markets, commercial real estate, and some riskier investments in tech startups that greatly amused me. But money was no longer my primary measure of success. It was a tool for freedom, not an end in itself. 3 months ago, I had received a letter from Alexander. A real letter, handwritten, not a text or an email. In it, he apologized for the misunderstandings and expressed hope that we could rebuild our family relationship. I had read the letter 3 times before storing it in a folder along with all the other documents from this period of my life. I had not responded, and I had no intention of doing so. Not because I was cruel or vengeful, but because I had learned to recognize manipulation even in its most subtle forms. Alexander wasn't apologizing for trying to steal my estate. He was apologizing for misunderstandings. He wasn't acknowledging the harm he had caused. He was expressing hope for reconciliation on his terms. The Eleanor of a year ago would have felt guilty for not responding. The Eleanor of now understood that protecting my peace of mind was more important than maintaining toxic relationships, even with family. That morning, as I read the Wall Street Journal and checked the performance of my investments, the doorbell rang. It was a woman in her 60s, well-dressed but with eyes red from recently crying. "Mrs. Harrington? I'm Carol Peterson. I saw your story on the news a few months ago. I think I need help." I invited her in and served her coffee while she told me her story. It was too familiar. Adult children pressuring her to sell her house and move to a more appropriate residence for her age. Constant comments about her confusion and inability to manage her own finances. Suggestions about the convenience of transferring control of her bank accounts to more competent relatives. "I don't know what to do," she finally told me. "They are my children. How can I fight my own children?" I took her hands and told her the words no one had said to me when I needed them most. "Carol, you're not fighting your children. You are fighting for your right to live your own life, and you have not only the right, but the responsibility to yourself to protect that freedom." As I connected her with my foundation's attorneys and explained the resources available to her, I felt a deep satisfaction that no financial gain had ever given me. This was my life now, not the lonely widow waiting for crumbs of affection from a manipulative son, but a woman who had transformed her pain into purpose, her trauma into strength, her isolation into community. Have you ever experienced a situation where close family tried to control or manipulate you financially? Tell me about it in the comments, because your story could help someone else who is going through the same thing. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the channel so this message reaches someone who needs to hear it. Because no one, regardless of age, should have to choose between family love and personal freedom. Sometimes, the bravest decision you can make is choosing yourself.